Hello, is it working? Oh yeah, it's working. Okay, welcome to the second session of this day. I think we'll start slowly. We are late, but I promise we won't be so late after this session. We'll make sure you get your lunch on time. So my name is Anna Wylegała. I'm the convener of the conference, and it will be my pleasure to chair this session, which is a bit different than the previous sessions because we have been developed it as a round table, which means that we invited distinguished scholars in the field who are supposed to get involved in the dialogue with each other, but also a bit with me, and I hope with you after we finish with the official part. And I will introduce them in a minute. But first, I will speak a little bit about the topic of this roundtable. Yeah, you have it on the screen. So it's cherished, disputed, neglected, the heritage of the former landowning elites in the Central and Eastern Europe. So we would like to, during this session, reflect on what is the status of the heritage of the gentry, nobility, aristocracy, in countries that used to belong to the Polish-Ukrainian Commonwealth and to the Habsburg monarchy in the past. We would like to reflect on what is the very definition of this heritage, and also who is involved in producing concepts, ideas, interpretations connected to this heritage. And after all, whose heritage it is today. And what determines the fact that in one country it might be cherished, preserved, liked. In other countries it might be neglected, abandoned, not cherished at all. As you might have noticed, many of these issues raised this way have been already covered during this conference, inevitably. But I think that this is the moment to go in depth and maybe also to approach the very notion of the heritage critically. And I still have in mind what Marta Kurkowska-Buzan said about the very process of ruination of the manners being also part of certain heritage. So I would encourage us to approach the notion of heritage innovatively and critically. The general idea of this conference was to go beyond Poland and to go beyond Central and Eastern Europe. But this roundtable brings us back to Central and Eastern Europe with its numerous historical disruptions, disconnections, discontinuities, illogical issues. So I hope we'll cover at least some of them. And we'll thus have an input about Poland, Czech Republic, Romania, maybe Hungary, I think. And I will also bring a bit of my own expertise about Ukraine to the table. And I will now introduce our distinguished speakers, who are also members of our academic council. So these are people who made this conference happen. And I'm really glad that we have all of you here on site, which was not always easy. So I will start in the alphabetical order. Constantin Iordachi is professor of history at the Central European University in Budapest. He's involved in editorial bodies of several journals, among others CEU Review of Books, East Central Europe, Fascism, Comparative Fascist Studies. He has published widely on comparative history in Central Europe, mostly on citizenship, the history of fascism and the Holocaust, and the collectivization of agriculture, and he has edited or co-edited over 20 collective volumes. His most recent publications include, and I will bring the titles, The Fascist Faith of the Legion Archangel Michael in Romania, 1927-1941, Martyrdom and National Purification, 2023, and the second one, Liberalism, Constitutional Nationalism and Minorities, The Making of Romanian Citizenship, 1750-1918. Iordachi is also a member of the Academic Committee of the House of European History in Brussels. And in the current academic year, he is a senior fellow at the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies. Then Radmila Švaříčková Slabáková is Associate Professor of History at Palacký University Olomouc. And she's a co-chair of the Memory Studies Association Working Group, Family, Memory and Intergenerational Exchange. Her research interests encompass modern history, oral history, and memory studies. She is the author of 2 books and numerous articles on Austro-Hungarian nobility in the 19th and 20th centuries, and I just named the books. Family Strategies of Nobility, published in 2007, and The Myth of Nobility in Us and Between Us, published in 2013. And recently she has published on family memory and Second World War memory and edited Memory, Practices, Transmission and Uses in a Global Perspectives, published in 2021. And last but not least, Tomasz Zarycki is sociologist and social geographer, and he's a professor at the University of Warsaw and also deputy director of the Robert Zając Institute for Social Studies. His main fields of interest are sociology of knowledge, of politics and culture, and the historical sociology of elites. His publications include the following books in English: Ideologies of Eastness in Central and Eastern Europe, published in 2014, and The Polish Elite and Language Sciences, A Perspective of Global Historical Sociology, 2022. And he's also an author of one of the most referred books of this conference, I think, with a kind of untranslatable into English title, Totem inteligencki, Arystokracja, szlachta i ziemiaństwo w polskiej przestrzeni społecznej. Inteligencja z totem, probably, Aristocracy, Nobility and Landed Gentry in the Polish social space. So we agreed that we'll have 2 rounds of questions, and we'll have more or less 7 minutes for each answer. And I am an awfully strict moderator. And I also encourage you to react to what the other speakers say. So the first question would be, what does the heritage of the former landowning elites, however we call them, landed gentry, aristocracy, nobility, mean in the country you have the research expertise about? How is it defined, and also what is its specificity? And we'll start with Constantin.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be here and to interact with you. I would like to refer mostly to the case of Romania. Romania is a very complex country because it came together as an aggregate of several historical provinces, Moldova and Wallachia, which were part of the Byzantine Orthodox Commonwealth, and then under Ottoman sovereignty, then Transylvania and the Banat, part of the Kingdom of Hungary, then Bukovina, part of the Habsburg Empire, and Bessarabia, which was part from 1812 of the Tsarist Russia. So in fact, when we engage with Romanian history, we engage in comparative history. There are so many imperial legacies there, and so many branches of aristocracy. So we could compare branches of aristocracy: Hungarian aristocracy in Transylvania, Austrian aristocracy in Bukovina, or local aristocracy in Wallachia and Moldova. But these branches of aristocracy were also in relation to each other, entangled. For example, the aristocracy in Moldova, they really had many relations to the Szlachta. Many were part of the Szlachta. They become members of the Szlachta, or with the Hungarian aristocracy in Transylvania. So it's a very interesting case of entangled history and of various branches of aristocracy. It's also interesting that in the 19th century, the process of modernization was led by the Liberal Party. So the fourth constitution of the United Romania was actually a Convention of Paris, 1856. According to that modern constitution, all aristocratic titles were abolished. So we have a total break with the past and the abolition of aristocratic titles. Nevertheless, landowners were very important socially, and there was really a fusion with the bourgeoisie. Then after 1918, when Greater Romania came together, Romania implemented one of the most radical agrarian reforms in Europe, mostly because aristocracy in this annexed territories were mostly of foreign descent, so Hungarian or German. So overall, we have a very rich heritage in terms of legal traditions, family traditions, but also architecture all over Romania. There's been much destruction, unfortunately, with the communist regime when aristocracy was eliminated as a class. Most large landowners were actually deported inside Romania, and the heritage was destroyed. And most of the villas or mansions became centers of collective farms. And so there's been much destruction over the last 50 years. But nowadays, there's a revival of aristocratic traditions and also of heritage. Heritage in terms of family, so people claiming back their land, claiming back their real estate property, and also restoring their heritage. And there's much attention to it. As a fun fact, King Charles III also acquired estates in Transylvania, and one of the estates that he lives on is also open for the public as a museum. That actually attracts a lot of attention to this kind of aristocratic heritage in Transylvania. Yes, I would say a very rich heritage in Romania, and also with so many branches and so many actors, Hungarian community, Romanians, and the Hungarian state as well, very much in Transylvania, and in restoring the heritage of the former Hungarian aristocracy.
Thank you so much. I think that one of the most important things you said is this making us aware of the fact that thinking about heritage is time sensitive. I mean, in Poland and in this part of Europe, we largely think about the heritage as being endangered after 1944. But there is also this factor of agricultural reforms conducted in the interwar period, which was not, in fact, I think, discussed during this conference in large. So it's also time-sensitive heritage, and it's really interesting that you point out on this many actors involved in the field. So I will be interested to learn more in the discussion. Radmila?
Okay, so can you hear me? Yeah, perhaps. I'm also very happy and very pleased to be invited to this conference. So thank you, Anna, and thank you all. I also believe that it's important to go to history and to understand the phenomenon of nobility in the past, to be able to understand the heritage today, and also to understand the attitude to this heritage today. And as for what is called now the Czech Republic and former Czechoslovakia, and in the 19th century Habsburg monarchy, Cisleitania. So the situation with nobility and was a little bit different. I believe that it's a different phenomenon than Šlachta in Poland. Because in Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia, that is Czech Silesia, we had the nobility which were quite small in numbers. So it means I can give you some percentage. For example, in Bohemia, the number of nobility at the end of 18th century, it was 0.1% of all male citizens. And then in Galicia, what is called sometimes Austrian Poland, it was 0.2%. In Lower Austria, it was 0.6%. And in Hungarian part of the monarchy, it was 5%. So you can see that also the number of nobility is important because it says what the place of these people in the history is. So it means in Bohemia and Moravia, the lowest number of nobility, but large estates, very big estates. So these people were very rich. So sometimes we call them, or these estates are called latifundia, and these people are called magnates. So it's not comparable, I believe, to Polish szlachta, like Gentry. So it means that in Bohemia and Moravia, we didn't have this phenomenon of szlachta, like of this petite noblesse, like small nobility. So it didn't exist. So it's very important to know, to assess the heritage of these people. And the third point, these people were cosmopolitan. So they were a little bit, or also very heavily indifferent to nationalism, to the idea of nationalism in the 19th century. I know also that there is a big difference between Czech nobility, international, and indifferent to nationalism, and Polish szlachta in the 19th century, and perhaps also in the 20s, and at the beginning of the 20th century. And these nobility, our members of nobility, were very close to the emperor. So sometimes we call or we speak about the Hofgesellschaft. It means the first society that gravitated around the emperor. When the year 1918 came and the dissolution of the Habsburg Empire, it meant that these people became the enemies of the newly created state of New Czechoslovakia, because they were associated with the Habsburgs. And what followed it is known. So it's the abolition of noble titles, the abolition of noble privileges. It is the land reform, the agrarian reform. But even after this landed reform, nobility was quite powerful. And then the Second World War and year 45, which meant the expulsion of Sudeten Germans. And it means that also a very large part of nobility were expelled because they became close to Nazi parties, etc., so were expelled according to the Beneš decrees. So the situation in 1948, when the communists came to power, is already quite dramatic. And after 1948, it meant emigration or exile of many of these noble families. And only a very small number of them remained in the territory of Czechoslovakia. Then we have the year 1989, so Velvet Revolution, the collapse of the Soviet bloc, etc. And what can we see? So it's the return of these nobles who emigrated. And for us, researchers, it was an opportunity to begin to speak about nobility and to begin to research something what was abolished from history, because, as Constantin Iordachi said, communists were not in favor of nobles and of aristocracy, and they were opponents of the regime, of course, and so they were persecuted and etc. So for us, at the beginning of the 1990s and in the early years of the 21st century, it was really the opportunity to cover the white spots of Czech history and of Czech historiography. and to learn about what these people were, what they did, and what were their thoughts and their identity. So this research was very much connected to the politics, but also to social questions and to the position of these former nobles in the society. So that's all for now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for bringing this importance of historically different structures of landowning elites in our countries for understanding our attitude and our society's attitude to the heritage. So now we are moving to Tomasz, and I'm sure you will bring some sociological perspective to the table.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. And answering your question about the meaning of this noble heritage, I will try to address in a very abstract, general sense. And my take, which has been presented in the book you mentioned, the Intelligentsia Totem, is that in fact this noble heritage has been nationalized, to some extent universalized in Poland in a national sense. So I would argue that it became part of a Polish national heritage, but not without several ambivalences. But this is my general point, which historically I relate to the establishment of the Polish Second Republic, which I am arguing with Rafał Smoczyński in our book, was the moment not only of regaining independence, but also of important revolution, unnamed or invisible Polish revolution, which we call Intelligentsia Revolution. So we argue that in 1918, the intelligentsia became the dominant elite in Poland, and it still remains, even as I'm arguing, hegemonic. But this was very specific moment in time, and I think this passage from Regency Council that was even presented at our conference to Marshal Piłsudski, who embodied this all these features of the ideal intelligentsia member: a petty noble, a socialist, but critical of nobility to some extent, and becoming the leader of the Second Republic, which is established as a republic, which does not recognize the noble titles, but which respects the noble heritage, and to a large extent also respects aristocracy heritage, and also aristocracy as a group is recognized informally, but it becomes a dominated group. Piłsudski talks in the interwar period to the aristocratic leaders, but they are already his clients. They are not the dominant faction of the elite. And I would argue that to some extent the Polish model, because we are also talking about the Polish citizenship model, which is based on this ideal intelligentsia member who can be imagined as has this petty nobility or noble, has some noble roots, but he's a nobleman, but intelligentsia member. This model is not exactly similar, but to some extent probably close to the British model of the transition from feudalism to democratic system with glorious revolution, which was an evolutionary revolution. So in a way, Polish invisible revolution of 1918 was also evolutionary, and it involved what I would argue was takeover of this noble heritage by the intelligentsia. So this is something which is rarely mentioned. This perspective is my very subjective point of view, that until 1918, the actual aristocracy and nobility leaders were the main owners of this heritage, of this identity. But after 1918, the main major part of this nobility was taken over. One could even say appropriated by the intelligentsia, and now it belongs to the intelligentsia with all the ambiguities. It's this heritage became part of this Polish civic ethos, Polish civic identity, and as our title suggests, the aristocracy, nobility, there's no clear name for this group, but remains as a faction of intelligentsia and plays the role of a totem. They symbolize the continuity of the current Polish Republic with this feudal Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which is a myth of continuity, but it's very important funding myth of the contemporary Polish state. It started with the Second Republic, and communists had some aspirations, of course, of destroying it, but they just barely managed to weaken it a bit in Stalin's period. But it was so strong that it remained in place during the entire communist period. There were some elements, of course, in the communist narrative of critical attitudes towards this overtly feudal elements of this heritage and attempts to reevaluate the peasant heritage. But in fact, the communists did not manage to overthrow, to change, to replace this model, which after the fall of communism became reinforced for obvious reasons. And maybe to conclude this part of my remarks is maybe this is the reason why it's so important currently to integrate the peasant heritage into the broader Polish national debate or identity. We had in this conference an attempt to set up a dialogue between those two heritages, the peasant and the noble, and my feeling was that this was very difficult to really establish a real dialogue, like to include, and still is difficult. We have this critical historians now trying to work out this new reading of the peasant heritage in Poland, and I think one reason why it's so difficult to achieve what they would like to is that in this very Polish model of citizenship, the nobility remains this idealized, naturalized basis for ideal citizen. So peasants are in a way systematically excluded, or maybe not excluded, but depreciated in the Polish civic model. And one can be, of course, quite critical. This is a source of the very strong inequality, asymmetry in the Polish civic model, because by definition, everything somehow noble is higher, more evaluated than anything peasant. But one can, I think, has to recognize that there is this idea, democratic ideal behind this Polish civic model, that this revolution of 1918 involved the universal ennoblement, the extension of the noble status to all citizens of the Second Republic. So this is I think this is the essence of the specific Polish model, and the reason why it became so much universalized, and whether we like it or not, it's a core of the national Polish national identity.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for mentioning intelligentsia, because I think that we somehow were missing this. I mean, this issue was missed in our discussions during last days. I mean, Professor Jakubowska kind of started the discussion about how we research the elites, also in terms of methodology during our keynote lecture, but then we kind of abandoned it. So I'm glad it's back, the discussion about who is the elite and what are the consequences of being an elite and what's happening with the heritage of the elite and whose heritage it is. I will now proceed with the second question. So I would like to ask you about whose heritage it is now. Does it mean, I mean, the question goes to the local communities, the question goes to the intelligentsia, the question goes to the macro level of the society. So in terms of preservation of the material heritage, but also in terms of the responsibility, who does feel responsible for this heritage, however we define it again. But also this is a question about whose heritage it is in terms of symbolic belonging and identity and memory. So who feels that it is my heritage, the heritage of the landowning elites in Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Czech Republic? Constantin, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think to answer this question, we have to look at the period of transition from communism to post-communism. With the fall of communism, many countries tried to return to the interwar period. In Romania, for example, most political parties of the interwar period were recreated. The constitution of the interwar period was reinstated. So that was the model. And then also the property of the interwar period was restored almost in integrum. Overnight, you had 16 million landowners in Romania because everybody got their land back. And so there's a revival of family traditions. There is a revival of property, and also going back to the interwar period. So the main actors would be families, and we conducted research into why people claim, for example, land ownership. Obviously, for many of them, it was kind of a burden. They were even urban dwellers, and it was about tradition. It was about family. It was about not betraying your ancestors and claiming back that land. And so as part of that, of course, you also have aristocratic families that have this tradition of the title and also of the land, including forests, including buildings. And so first of all, family tradition. Then you have communities. And here, yes, for example, I mentioned the Hungarian community in Transylvania, and obviously it coagulates around these aristocratic traditions. Aristocratic families in Transylvania are very important. The same goes for the German community. And then other institutions such as the monarchy. The monarchy in Romania is recognized as a legal entity nowadays. There was no restoration, but the monarchy family is kept in high esteem, and they also receive back their property, castles, landed estates, and they are very important in this field of heritage. And then, yes, the local communities are also very important with the development of tourism. You have to manage heritage, and you see a lot of restoration of castles, part of tourism. So overall, as I said, there are many actors at local level, also at a national level. And again, this multiplicity of not just actors, but of communities in Romania, because you have, as I said, so many historical provinces and so many different traditions that come together.
Thank you so much, Radmila.
Yes, I'm still thinking a little bit about what was said about Polish nobility and this kind of nationalization and appropriation by the nation of this heritage. like the extension of noble, perhaps values and noble force to be taken by the nation. So it's a really extremely different situation in comparison with Bohemia and Moravia, where nobles, as I said, were very small in numbers. So these nobles were quite exceptional, and still are seen somebody like from a fairy tale, I would say, in this popular opinion, to go to a chateau in which a nobleman or a noble family lived. It means to go to a kind of a fairy tale and to see this the past as it was, and to imagine this past as it was, like in the 18th or in the 19th century. So this is a part of this heritage in the popular opinion, perhaps to look at nobles as of in the past, as a kind of a heritage that is vanished already. And that was also true in history, because, as we said, both during communism, this nobility was completely destroyed. It was also another distinguished feature in comparison with Poland, because here, as it was said, the communism wasn't so strong to destroy nobility, but it happened in Czechoslovakia, and I believe also in Romania and in Hungary, that nobility as a group of people was really destroyed, and and this heritage was appropriated by the state because the estates and the chateaus, the big chateaus, were confiscated or nationalized by the state. So now we have two sorts of this heritage, I would say, for the public opinion of the public. So one sort of this heritage are nationalized properties, and the second way, these are properties returned to their owners after 1989, so after the fall of communism. So according to the restitution laws, the former noble aristocratic families could claim their heritage and receive their properties back, not only landed properties or like forests, their lands, but also their chateaus and buildings, etc. And so it means that this heritage is now private, but still these nobles, and as I said, these aristocratic families were big landowners, so they allow tourists to visit their chateau as it was under communism. And there is the second kind of this heritage for me, as I am a historian, is in the archives. Because the archives of nobility were also nationalized after 1948. And these archives are still very widely unresearched. So there are really many ego documents, so what we call ego documents, like letters, private documents, diaries, which were written by these noble families and the members of nobility in the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, which are waiting to be uncovered and to become a part of Czech history or the history of Central Europe. Can I add something else? Yes, and Or I will leave it for now, and perhaps I will add it later on.
Okay, I will ask each of you whether you have any comments to each other after this round, so there will be plenty of time. Thank you. It was fascinating that you mentioned the archives as part of the heritage. I think it's quite often overlooked. The archives, like in material sense, but also in terms of being intangible heritage, also in terms of the access to knowledge, which was restricted before and is not anymore, has been not anymore.
It wasn't restricted because it was nationalized after 1948, so it immediately became the property of all, the property of the state.
Yeah,
so
I meant that it was kind of restricted or limited before the nationalization. The archive stayed as the private property within the families, so the access was limited, and then it was lifted, kind of restriction.
Yes. In that sense, I agree.
Yeah, Tomasz, the floor is yours.
The question of this to whom this heritage belongs, I think in Poland is strongly related to this issue that I mentioned of this symbolic nationalization of this heritage, and at the same time existence of this small group or actors who claim the aristocratic or noble or landowners' identity, and even some of them own some of the property, and I think there is a basic tension related with this transition, that this heritage is universal, in a sense national, but at the same time, of course, there are still particularisms related with, especially with the real property relations, ownership rights, but also with the existence of those groups who claim to be the descendants of this feudal elite. So I think we can observe this tension as it manifests itself in many circumstances, and this most important treasures of Polish culture, I think, are the best examples of this tension. For example, the Wilanów castle was involved in the debate about its ownership between the family, descendants of the last owners, and the public sphere, which was like the elite, the public elite, which I would technically see mostly as intelligentsia representatives, who in the name of the nation try to define what belongs to whom and how it should be administered, restored, etc. So there is, of course, this broader debate about reprivatization in Poland, but especially it becomes the most interesting in the case of this most symbolic objects like the royal castle of Wilanów, when the question not only of the simply legal and technical ownership rights was brought to discussion, but the symbolic role of the castle as one part of the national heritage. And I think these are the moments where the representatives of those families, who quite often are public in the role of descendants of the families, must really be very strategic in making these claims, because their status is based on this totemic status. So they're like, in a way, public figures. They were part of the intelligentsia elite and take some kind of a symbolic responsibility for taking care of this heritage. But they must remember also that they are not the elite now. The intelligentsia is now the elite. So they must be careful with representing too particularistic demands, because then the universal status is undermined. So another example, more recent, was related to the Czartoryski collection in Krakow, and as you may remember that the state paid, like bought from the status of this collection was ambiguous. It was private and public, and then it was decided that that the state must ensure its public, 100% public status. So they paid some money to the family, which even the nature of this payment was discussed. Whenever this is actual payment for which represents some value of this collection, or as it was argued by the family representatives, it's only symbolic compensation because the value of the collection was much bigger. And they would not dare to ask for a real price from the Polish state because they were collecting for generations these treasures for Polish nation. So I think this is this basic tension that it's universal, national, but still the actors are there, and they happen to still own or claim some of those objects, symbolic and especially material, and tensions appear from time to time.
Thank you so much. So now it is time for you to maybe ask a question to each other or to react to each other. Was there anything surprising for you in what the other speakers said?
I want to build on two ideas that were expressed by my colleague here. One is, how do we speak about aristocracy? Is it a legal group or is it like a symbolic group? I think legally, there are many legal models there in Europe. One would be the liberal radical model that comes from the French Revolution, where aristocracy was abolished, all titles and privileges were abolished, and you have equality before the law. And so that was France, but also then all those countries that implemented the French civil code, like I said, Romania as well. Of course, aristocracy still continued to exist because these were landowners, they had the social prestige, they had the cultural capital, and there was a process of elite reproduction, so they were still remain part of the elite. And then there's another more conservative legal model in which even with the process of modernization, aristocracy continued to exist, aristocratic titles and sometimes even privileges continues to exist, and they were linked to the monarchy. If we look at the Habsburg Empire until late, and then even Hungary, which remains, say, formally a monarchy, even in the inter period, you still have aristocratic titles and privileges. So that's an important cleavage, which I think shows different traditions of aristocracy and position in various countries. And then very important, the relation between aristocracy and the peasantry. I also think that these discourses are not very well integrated, and sometimes they are even antagonistic because, let's face it, aristocratic discourses about the peasantry are very deheroizing or very critical, whereas national discourse about the peasantry are really idealizing peasantry. I think there are two traditions. When we speak about nation building, we tend to emphasize the role of the peasantry as really the foundation of the nation. But when we speak about the state, traditions of state building, then aristocracy is very important, and preservation of the state and an important role in state building. So they pop up in different contexts, the peasantry and then the aristocracy.
Yeah, perhaps my question is if there is a kind of public debate about the position of Szlachta in Poland in these days. So is it a pertinent public question or a pertinent research question, or what the position of research on Szlachta is in Poland now?
Tomasz, would you like to start?
I don't know. It's quite ambiguous term in, I think, Polish history, and such a wide strata as you know that there are several smaller debates about Szlachta, but I don't see any big central debate.
Yeah, I meant if the public is interested in Szlachta, in Gentry, and so on, but to compare it with the situation in the Czech Republic after after the fall of communism and now. So.
I would
because
say
of
yes.
this nationalization, so it seems to me that the public should be more intrigued, let's say, that in my country.
Yes, but in Poland, the Szlachta, nobility, has this different meanings. We have this aristocratic elite, we have petty nobility, we have different kind of actors who maybe or want to be identified with Szlachta. So, so when you say Szlachta, it may in Poland it may mean many different things. I would argue, but
and you were referring when you were talking about your book. So you were referring to which strata of this Szlachta?
Well, I was mostly speaking about this elite, which I, as I said, has this totemic role, which is these are descendants usually of the most wealthy families who became part of the intelligentsia elite in Poland, and they are more or less visible. This is also important, and some of these persons are public, maybe not extremely famous, but quite visible, and they publicly represent the whatever you call it, usually aristocracy. But there is this ambiguity of definition, because as it has been here said many times, in Poland there is no clear, no heraldry, no clear legal status of this elite. So there's a lot of confusion, which was also even present here during our debates. But there is this vague understanding that we have some aristocracy, and what's also important, that it's related to the Western aristocracy. I think this is an interesting element, that it appears in media, for example, when the coronations or events in the English royal family, quite often the Polish distant cousins are invited to the Polish media to discuss the issues nobility, and this symbolizes this cosmopolitan aspect of nobility and Polish close ties to the Western elite, broadly speaking, Polish Westness. So this is one of the many contexts that this elite, this group, which I see as a part of Polish intelligentsia, becomes part of the public sphere. But on the other hand, I would not personally, but this is like impression, I would not say that this is a central debate currently. That this is a central issue, the Szlachta or aristocracy. They are present, but we have different more important and more emotional debates, both politically and intellectually speaking, in Poland.
Yeah, if I can add something, I think that Professor Jakubowska mentioned it briefly in her keynote on Wednesday, saying that there was a great interest in whatever was aristocratic or belonging to the gentry at the beginning of the 90s, because before that it was forbidden. I mean, it was forbidden to research, it was forbidden to tell about your own family history. So there was a huge interest in whatever was connected to the gentry and to the Szlachta, to the ziemiaństwo, to the aristocracy in Poland in the 90s. And then both in terms of the research and in terms of what was happening with publishing the memoirs, with the presence of this topic in the public debate, there were huge expectations in terms of the restitution, and then it slowed down because the restitution didn't happen for various reasons, because the memoirs were published, and because it turned out that this class or the former class is not really able to regain its position. It's not possible simply to come back to what existed before 1939. So the interest in both public discourse and research slowed down, and we do have a good research on gentry aristocracy history being conducted, but these are narrow circles. And when I was preparing the research for my own book on the agricultural reform, I was surprised that the agricultural reform was not covered almost at all after 1989. Of course, there were plenty of books written before, during the communist period, But then that was one of the white spots that was not covered. I mean, we have plenty of excellent research on the collectivization happening in the 50s, but not on the expropriation of the gentry. So so it was for me it was puzzling that the research was not actually conducted, although it was already possible after 1989. So now I, of course, have my questions to the speakers.
Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was my question to compare it with the situation in the Czech Republic, so I would like to add what the situation was and is. So it's a little bit similar. I would say also that in the 1990s it was a fascination with everything which concerned nobles and aristocracy, and it was a public fascination, but also a fascination in research circles, at universities, and so on. And I think that the peak of this fascination was the first decade of the 21st century, where large conferences on nobility in the 19th and 20th centuries were organized. Another conference about nobility and totalitarianism, and etc. So very big, exceptional conferences, so mainly Czech conferences, but it was a new topic, a new subject, not research before, as we said, so under communism or also in Poland. So the topic of nobility was abandoned, so it was expelled, etc. Also, I could observe this slowing down a little bit. I remember 20 years ago, there is a bookshop in Olomouc close to my university. And 20 years ago, when I entered this bookshop, so the first thing I could see on the shelves, books about nobility, about aristocracy, like about families, about biographies, memoirs, also research works, and they were there. And now, these days, when I enter this bookshop, so no nobility, so it has disappeared. It's nowhere, and it's also my observation because. I think that now it's the topic of bachelor and master dissertations or doctoral PhD dissertation, but not so much topic of new research. So it seems to me a little bit that it was exhausted, like the topic. In terms of methodology, in terms of on whom to focus, etc. So I can observe also a decline a little bit in the interest in nobility, like both in the public and in research.
Yeah, and to your point about we have studies of collectivization, but not so much of the destruction of the aristocracy and also of their heritage. We did a very comprehensive study of collectivization in Romania, and of course we arrive also at the question of destruction of the aristocracy, and we are very close to actually see what happened to their heritage as well. It's a very difficult research, it's very painstaking because of the nature of destruction, which went mostly undocumented, and because you need people trained not just in history of families or social history, but it's mostly history of objects, tracing objects and looking what happened to objects. And so it's a different type of research, and it's mostly centered on heritage. And so, yeah, it would be wonderful to organize a project on the destruction of heritage in Central Eastern Europe. But again, it's very difficult to do it.
Yeah, maybe there will be some ideas after this conference. I'm always advocating comparative research, so hopefully. I think that because we started 15 minutes later, we still have half an hour for the discussion. So I, of course, have my own questions to each of you, maybe even more than one. But I will now pass the mic to the public, and I will ask my questions only if you don't have any, which I doubt. Yeah, go on.
Thank you very much. Works? Yeah, you can hear me? Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for this fascinating discussion. It was really great. I wanted to say, when you ask a question if there are discussions about nobles and gentry now in Poland, and the answer of my colleagues was not, but what would you say about the movie year 1670, which is so discussed and which shows, in my opinion, how problematic it is, and that simply we probably need another angle. And I also, Anya, want to say that your book provoked huge discussions. So I was on a few discussions around your book, and not with the scholars, so there were always some, but with wide public. So many, yeah, of course we can say very good publishing house, but still many people came, and often the discussion were about my family, about who we are, you know, about in our village, or that was this kind of discussion. So I would say that probably the way that you said the beginning of the 90s, how the nobles were discussed, was for that time needed, and now we need simply another perspective, another approach. And I have a question to all of you. It was very well visible in your Ludmila and Constantin speeches that when you are talking about nobles and aristocracy, you are talking about peoples coming from various empires. In Tomac's presentation, it was as if there were only Poles. What happened at the beginning of the Second People's Republic with nobles and aristocracy from Austro-Hungarian Empire and Russian Empire? They were still there. And to all of you about these, you know, hierarchies, because there are always hierarchies. We preferred some nobles to some others nobles. We more identified with one group and another. So I'm wondering, yeah, who are like better appreciated both in the period and now, you know, who are like more ours than others, or it is divided with the regions still or it is like more like now appropriated, nationalized, as in case of Poland. And to you, Constantin, because in Romania, the Romanian Orthodox Church has this tradition of the religious Orthodox families who are both in the, you know, they have also families like how much religion was important here for the nobles, and particularly from the, you know, how the Romanian Orthodox Church entangled with some nobles, and how this religious prestige as well, and this habitus and capital helped, or, you know, interact, yes, with the level of with capital of these people now. Thank you.
I think that Zuzanna asked plenty of questions, so we'll ask these questions and then maybe gather a few and proceed. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, I just propose that we answer these questions because there was more than one, and then we'll gather a few questions and answer the next questions. Whoever would like to start? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm fascinated by this entanglement of various branches of aristocracies, and as I said, Romanian lands are very interesting for studying these entanglements. For example, as I said, Wallachia and Moldova, they were part of the Ottoman realm, but they had internal autonomy. You know, there's no aristocracy in Serbia, Bulgaria, which were directly occupied by the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottomans destroyed aristocracy. Wallachia and Moldova, they had internal autonomy, and they preserved their aristocracy. And so that's why we can speak about aristocracy, you know, in our tradition. And then in Moldova, Moldovan aristocracy, they are very close to the Polish state. And well, they were vassals of the Polish kingdom, and so many of them bought estates in Poland, and they're part of Szlachta, so they were really part of this larger commonwealth. And whereas those in Wallachia, they were closer to Transylvania and to the Hungarian aristocracy, and again they were part of the diet in across the mountains. So there were these entanglements also in terms of aristocracy, which is very interesting to study. Then in terms of religion, well, in Moldova and Wallachia, of course, as I said, they were part of the Orthodox Commonwealth. Religion was very important in the cultural prestige of the aristocracy, and they were building churches, and they're very close to the church. But in fact, these two principalities were quite homogeneous from a religious and ethnic point of view. I think religion is more important in the context of Transylvania, when you have so many ethnic groups, and there were strict hierarchies in the kingdom of, in the Principality of Transylvania. And Romanians, as being of Orthodox religion, were actually excluded from nobility rights because they were neither Protestants nor Catholics. And so there you have a hierarchy which is based on religious exclusion. And so in that sense, there were many tensions, right, ethnic tensions also against the Hungarian or German aristocracy. Yeah, so overall, I think these principalities are interesting because they are multi-ethnic in the case of Transylvania and the Banat and Bukovina, and also they are entangled. So that's why, Central Europe in general, it's a case of entangled history, and especially the Polish and Hungarian legal models. So the aristocracy in Poland and Hungary, they were so strong, and they were a model also for the principalities of Moldova and Wallachia. From here, these entanglements.
In terms of another approach, I think we haven't talked about ennoblement. So it was quite an important process in the 19th century to become noble. So people of bourgeois or middle-class origin could become ennobled by the emperor. So it's a huge process, and there were hundreds of these people who became nobles. Now I think that the research goes in the direction to research this ennoblement process. So recently a book, a seminal book of my colleague János Upenics has been published on Habsburg monarchy and about this process of ennoblement. It means that the members of what is called the Second Society became the members of the First Society. And these persons were of almost poor origin, or there were businessmen, entrepreneurs, so we can also study the process, the economic processes connected to nobility with this strata of research.
Tomasz?
Well, the question of imperial aristocracy, I did not mention it, but because I think this Polish crucial intelligentsia revolution was a national revolution. So it downgraded aristocracies in general, and it created a nation state ruled by the national intelligentsia. So only those factions of the former aristocracy who joined the Polish national intelligentsia could retain any relevance. I think the Habsburg family in Żywiec is a good example. They declared themselves Polish, and they were like in a way became part of the Polish intelligentsia. So I think for these reasons, after 1918, this non-Polish aristocrats, landowners were not important actors in the Polish public sphere. While of course before 1918, the empires were crucial, and I think that's also it's quite important that they were crucial for Polish aristocracy. This is one of the usually marginalized issues, that how much they relied on the relationship with this imperial courts and the entire imperial systems from which they benefited. But since after 1918 they had to become part of the Polish intelligentsia, so they usually silenced this pre-1918 part of the history of their families, where they're in close relations with imperial courts and other imperial elites who were often non-Polish. So I think there's a lot to be studied still in the history of those families.
Okay, so briefly about what is being discussed and what is not being discussed in the public discourse in Poland. I think that what is being discussed now most, intensively and vividly is the peasants' history and peasants' heritage and peasants' identity. And my book was indeed resonated quite much, but I think that only because it focused on the peasants' experience. It included the experience of the gentry because I wanted it, and I always perceived it as interconnected with the peasants' experience, because the peasants did not exist without the nobles and the landowning elites, and the landowning elites didn't exist in Poland without peasants. So it's kind of the artificial discussion artificial way of discussing it, to discuss it separately. And the very idea of this conference was also to bring these two trends together, which I think that we didn't succeed, but that's for another discussion. So that would be from my part of story, and I think that we should now gather 3 questions. Maybe not really long questions, rather questions than comments, please.
Maciej Rydel, Polish Gentry Association. Well, thank you very much for this conference. Let me say a few words, as I was the initiator of this conference 3 years ago. I asked about it my cousin, and it came to life, and it's great. It's great. The most probably valuable is the comparison between different countries and the situation of gentry. Well, in fact, it was aristocracy. In 70% probably of our discussion was about aristocracy. Anyway, of course, this is valuable as well. And the situation of aristocracy in Poland, as Marcin Radziwiłł said, was the holiday resort. That the aristocracy was in a better position, let's say, than the rest of landed gentry in Poland. The valuable would be some comparison of some general view of that how many descendants live in their palaces in different countries, for example. How many museums there are. Unfortunately, I was told that some will be sent to me. Okay, I'm very much interested in that. And how many ruins there are in different countries? What is the percentage of that? What's the comparison to Poland, which I was trying to show on my first speech? Then what happened with the landed gentry after 1945? Were arrested, disappeared in some way, emigrated, and so on, so on. There were some words about that as well. Thank you very much to Professor Slabáková about this comparison of what was the percentage of the landowners in Bohemia and Austria. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure in what period was it. Was it before the war?
No, it was the end of the 18th century.
18th century. Well, so in fact in Poland it was probably about 8% of the population. So it's really, the situations are different. The of course important question is to whom it belongs, the heritage now. Well, the situation in Poland is that nation thinks that it belongs to the nation. And there are many, it's some kind of social phenomenon that are aspirations of some percent of the population is to live in a manor house, for example. And there are many, probably 1,000 or something like that, houses which the people call, I am living in a manor house, which is false completely. And I would say that the percentage of people who go to museums located in palaces and manor houses, compared to the people who go to so-called wedding houses, so changed into hotels and so on, is much more they are in these wedding houses. And people think that this was the real manor house or palace, which is not true. So this is socially, it's a very important question and very important phenomenon, let's say, in Poland. Well, the last point is about.
I think that we have some
last
more
point
questions.
is about education. There is no education in Poland, and I don't know, probably in other countries as well, about this subject. I would expect at this conference some students of sociology from the University of Warsaw. That would be probably valuable for them. And is there any, are there any education in departments of sociology, history, and so on on that case? Thank you very much.
I think Marta?
Radmila said that the topic of the nobility has somehow was exhausted in the first decade of the 21st century. Sorry, I agree, and I dare to disagree with this because, as we noticed, well, perhaps during this conference we talk a lot about manners. And we tend to discuss the nobility, the history of nobility and the heritage in this, let's say, traditional perspective, from this traditional perspective. But wouldn't you notice that there's a growing interest in post-industrial heritage throughout the Europe and Central Europe? And we should remember that the nobility, they were entrepreneurs. This is their actually heritage. So from sugar factories to coal mines, this is property. This used to be a property of the nobility. So I think that there is an interest, and there's perhaps from a different angle we research the history of nobility and the contribution to the present. Thank you.
I think we can accommodate one more question and then proceed to answers.
I have a question concerning the heritage of nobility. In Russia, I noticed one thing which interests me. It is a big discrepancy between the memory of nobility that exists as books, souvenirs, interviews, all what they remember about the 20th century, but also in concerning even the end of the 19th century. And museums, cars, palaces, and all kind of manorial houses that tell about the life of nobility. Like there are quite a lot of manorial houses and palaces, and visitors visit them. And in these places, we never see anything about like how nobility remembers all kinds of experiences. I mean, we see the luxurious lifestyle, beautiful collections of pictures, furniture, and so on and so on. But it is disconnected with what we know, what we read about them. And so that's why I think that people who do not read but who visit palaces, they only obtain knowledge about like this beautiful image of nobility. even it is very strange because was so much published in recent years, but it's somehow not included in these types of museums, with some exceptions. So I would like to know if you noticed the same thing in your countries.
Yeah, we'll proceed to answers. I don't know whichever order you prefer.
Okay, so maybe the first question. Thank you for that. As I said, today Czech Republic is the country of aristocracy. So in terms of gentry, I cannot say anything because this word isn't used in my country because we didn't have such a phenomenon of gentry. And 20 years ago, I did interviews with the nobles who returned after the collapse of the communist regime, who returned to Czechoslovakia. It was the end and the beginning of the 1990s, and many of them gained their properties back according to restitution laws, and they settled in their former chateaus. And but it was a little bit tricky because, as I said, majority of nobles under the communist regime went into exile. So majority of them were abroad, so they returned. And a small number stayed in Czechoslovakia. I can say that about 20, let's say, noble families remained. So not a big number, but as I said, we are not a country of big numbers of nobilities. And under communism, many of them lived in blocks of flats, like usual citizens, you know it, so the way of living like that. And now they had their chateau returned back. And many of them said me that it's not possible for them to live in these chateaus because these chateaux were demolished, were cold, were not in the good state to live in them. So also it happened that some chateaus, but not these big chateaus we considered like national heritage, because they were nationalized under communism. But let's say smaller chateaus were also sold and sold out. And so the position and the attitude of nobles differed. Yeah? Some of them returned and lived in their chateaus. For example, Štenberg. Perhaps some of you know Český Štenberg is a small town, but it has a very big medieval castle. And Štenberg is one of the oldest Czech families, not coming from abroad, but really a Czech noble family, Czech aristocratic family. And Zdeněk Štenberg received his chateau according to the restitution laws and settled in the chateau. So it was quite curious because he had and his family had let's say a few rooms, and right next to his doors went a guided tour with tourists. so for tourists it was something extraordinary that suddenly they could see the proprietor of this chateau like coming out of his rooms. So some funny stories like that. So you can see that it's a kind of to return to this question. So I'm thinking now. So it's a private property, but it is also a part of a national heritage, because still tourists go there and can go there, can visit the chateaus and etc. Yeah. So perhaps the others. So.
Yeah, as a final comment, I think clearly aristocracy is a major institution of the ancien regime, and with the new regime and with modernity, they lost most political battles. They were on a retreat. Why do we then speak so much about aristocracy? I think one of the reasons is that because of the extraordinary resilience of this class. Even if they disappear legally, they knew how to reproduce the social capital into cultural capital. I've read studies, for example, of the ruling class in France. Even if the aristocracy disappeared after the French Revolution, you could see the families that were part of the ruling class, and there is much continuity there. So they could remain in many ways part of the ruling class. And then the major question is, I think, for us, and we wanted to give an answer to this, has the communist regime managed to destroy aristocracy as a class? Because there's a great discontinuity there, and more than four decades. I mean, we knew that the communists wanted to wage the war against the peasantry, and they wanted to destroy the peasantry. They couldn't succeed. The peasantry survived socialism. I'm not sure they'll survive capitalism as such, but they did survive socialism. But the aristocracy, I don't think they will be recreated as a class, but certainly there are many interest groups that have been recreated. I heard certainly there's a lot of interest in the aristocracy as history. And for me, one of the driving forces of this interest is the question of heritage. I think that's very important. And in terms of real estate, in terms of cultural heritage. And so that's, for that reason, I think the issue will stay with us as a topic.
I'm not able to answer first two questions. I didn't study the Polish manors or palaces, but I could make a short remark regarding this important reflection about this entrepreneurial part of the heritage, that especially the fact that this aristocracy landowners engaged in many kind of businesses, especially in late 19th century, also in industry, even banking. So I think this is intriguing question in Polish history, the almost entire disappearance of another important actor besides aristocracy, nobility, intelligentsia, namely the bourgeoisie. Because until 1918, bourgeoisie was an important player. It was much weaker in the western part of Europe, but still it was in place. And I would read its place as somewhere between aristocracy and intelligentsia. They were sometimes siding more the intelligentsia in the anti-noble ideological ideological discourses, the democratic modernity, etc. But in fact, they were very close to aristocracy, and part of the aristocracy started to invest their capitals into industry and banking because the primary economy, the agriculture was not productive enough, and as I read it now, this side of the history of those families is largely also marginalized. That what remains in the family and public memory is mostly this landowners' experience, manners, or this noble heritage, but this bourgeois sides of those investments, etc., are absent. And in general, history of Polish bourgeoisie almost disappeared. And I would explain it with this idea of the revolution, intelligentsia revolution, that actually both bourgeoisie and aristocracy, nobility, landowners lost, and during the Second Republic, from 1918 until 1945, they were losing their position, especially economic, but also political, and eventually they disappeared. And at the same time, intelligentsia took over, as I said, the larger part of this this heritage, symbolic heritage, but intelligentsia was mostly interested in this idealized noble side. So the manors, palaces are the important symbols of nation, of the elite, or etc. But all industrial objects were like disappeared are irrelevant in almost invisible, and it's what's also interesting. They're not part of the reprivatization debate. So this probably related both sides. That this lack of inclusion of the economic assets, industrial assets, into the privatization debate reinforces this marginalization of this heritage, and on the other side, the weakness of this heritage also was the reason why there was no idea of representation of the economic assets or industrial infrastructure. So I would agree that this was an important side of this richest landowners and aristocracy, but it's almost completely disappeared from both the family's memory and broader national memory.
Yeah. Okay. So I will also jump in answering the questions. Sophia, you asked about the situation in the museums. I'm not studying the museums like systematically, but from what I see is that what we are experiencing in Poland, what we have been experiencing in Poland for probably the last 15 years is this so-called narrative turn, which means that we tell the stories in the museums. We not only show the objects, or quite rarely show the objects without connecting them to the story of real people. And this also concerns museums showing some aristocratical or gentry legacy and heritage. And I'm just have in mind the example of the museum in Książ and the Princess of Daisy von Pless. So there is the entire story of this person. You see her dresses, but also you have the quotations from her diary. You have the memories of the local population about how they remember her. So I see this narrative turn also in what is shown in the museums about the gentry and aristocracy. And Marta, you are absolutely right about the fact that what we see is this creation of the specific subfields in the research. And I'm just thinking, of course, about the aristocrats and landowning elites as the entrepreneurs, but also I'm thinking about the Jewish gentry, and I'm really sorry that Shuki Ecker was the only speaker that was discussing this issue, but I'm glad he discussed it. In Galicia, we had so many Jewish landowners in Eastern Galicia until the First World War and even until 1939. And I do remember that there was a specific conference and a very large research project on the Jewish village estates, mostly in Western Europe, but also touching a bit of Central and Eastern Europe. So there is something happening. I mean, this creation of the subfields might be the future of the research on gentry and aristocracy, because it's bringing some fresh air to the table. Yeah, before I proceed to the announcement about the lunch, which is also always the most awaited news, I wanted to kind of provide you with a kind of my summary of the session. Maybe not a summary, but my final remarks on what we discussed. So my idea was to bring to the table scholars from various backgrounds and also from various countries, and I think that it worked quite well, because we really saw that there are so many different factors making our current attitude to the heritage and the current status of this heritage different. So this is, of course, the historical background. It matters whether it was 1% or 8%, because then the number of manors is different. And it mattered who was forming the core of this group. were there people from inside of the nation, from outside of the nation? Also, the time sensitivity, the time dynamic, whether this group lost its power, mostly political power, earlier or later. And last but not least, and I think that it might be most important factor, in fact, the restitution, whether it happened, when it happened, what were the conditions, because it, as far as I understand, it was unconditional in Romania, very broad. It was conditional in the Czech Republic. It was conditional in Lithuania. It didn't happen in Poland at all. It is the factor that we didn't have a paper focusing solely on the lack of the restitution law in Poland, but it is something that is, I think, flying in this room. We didn't have any kind of restitution law in Poland. It matters for the current status of this heritage in our country. So, but I'm also glad that we saw some connections and some, I think, possibilities for future. Maybe not cooperation, because usually conferences didn't result in direct cooperation, but maybe it will result in some ideas for a comparative approach. As I already mentioned, I'm always a fan of the comparative approach, so we should think about maybe not the four of us, everybody is welcome, but I would dream about the comparative project on the status of the Gentry, Nobility and Aristocracy heritage in Central and Eastern Europe. So I wish all of us that we see this kind of project happening in the future, and please contact whoever is here if you're interested. Thank you so much for participating, for making it to be in Warsaw with us, and also for good questions, thought-provoking remarks, and for fitting in the time. And the announcement for the end is that we are generous and we are having almost 1 hour lunch break. So we convene here again at 2:45. Thank you so much.